Hmm.
Hello, I am Jacqueline Lyon. Welcome to my channel, Lion Editing, where I help you refine your craft of writing. I am an editor. I work for the novel editing company, Dot and Dash LLC. We offer full services from copy editing to beta reading and author coaching. If you'd like help with any of your projects, just hit us up in the links below. All right, today I would like to talk to you about 3 questions you can ask about your writing instead of, is it good? I would like to talk about this because I think the concept of good is ultimately a destructive one. Logically, I think we all know that good is a moving target. It can mean a million different things to a million different people. It's arbitrary, and due to the fact it's arbitrary, it's almost meaningless. However, as writers, despite knowing this, we often ask ourselves, is it good? Or worse yet, we ask ourselves, am I good enough? And this is a dangerous question and a dangerous line of thought to follow. It's one of those little tortures of being a writer or a creator of any kind of art. Personally, I don't think it's useful to look at a piece of work and ask, is it good? Not necessarily because it's a bad question, but because it's a creative project, and creative works aren't written in binaries of yes or no, and is it good is a yes or no question. There are going to be parts of your work that are going to be stronger and parts of your work that are going to be less strong. Furthermore, you will often torture yourself with the question. You'll get discouraged, you'll get confused, you'll not want to write anymore if you keep pounding that question over and over again. It's just not helpful. However, as writers, we still need beacons to follow. We still need guiding principles to help us go from project to project in order to engage with our readers on a deep and meaningful level. So today, I'm going to go over 3 questions to ask yourself in order to engage with your readers on a more meaningful level. All right, let's get started. The first question you can ask yourself about your writing is, number 1, is it honest? Honest can also seem like an arbitrary metric. However, I think it's a much more useful question to ask yourself. You can ask, is it vulnerable? Is it meaningful to you? Does it reveal something? Is it real? These can be important questions because the truth is, readers might not always be looking for good, but will almost always respond to honesty. A good example of being honest in writing is Little Fires Everywhere by Celeste. This is a literary fiction novel about 2 families. One is a wealthy family that rents out a house to an artist and her daughter. It's ultimately about their conversation between each other, as well as themes of parenthood and conventionality. And I would argue that the writing is very frank and meaningful. Let me read you an excerpt. If they planned every detail, the Shakers had believed they could create a patch of heaven on earth, a little refuge from the world, and the founders of Shaker Heights had thought the same. In advertisements, they depicted Shaker Heights in the clouds, looking down upon the grimy city of Cleveland from a mountaintop at the end of the rainbow's arch. Perfection, that was the goal. And perhaps the Shakers had lived it so strongly it had seeped into the soil itself, feeding those who grew up there with a propensity to overachieve and a deep intolerance for flaws. Celeste grew up in the setting of Shaker Heights, Ohio, which is the same place the book takes place in, and she explores her feelings about the city in different ways. She very much has the setting as a kind of character in the story that remarks upon the actual characters themselves. This is also an exploration in many ways of her own feelings, both the good and the bad of the hometown she grew up in. And this willingness to explore feelings and characters and a way of life is what makes the book so compelling and interesting. It's honesty. The characters are honest. You can do the same thing in your own writing by asking a couple of questions. First of all, of course, am I being honest? Am I being truthful to my view of the world? Am I being vulnerable? This ability to be vulnerable in your writing is going to take it to the next level, and you will often find that readers will be more excited to engage with your work. All right, let's move to number 2. Is it finished? Have you completed everything you need to complete with your novel? Has it been edited to the best of your ability? Has someone read it and given feedback? Have you cleaned up the plot, the characters, and the pacing? Often, works aren't good or bad, but they are sometimes finished and not finished. An example of a book that could have used a little more finishing is Crier's War by Nina Varela. This is a steampunk novel about a maid automaton and her handmaiden. So it's a fantasy world where these robot fantasy creatures have taken over and humans that are trying to resist them. There's a romance between the heir to the maid throne and her handmaiden. There are parts of this book I really enjoyed. The tension between the two leads was well done. However, there are a few things that felt unfinished within the novel. Let me read a section from the first chapter. Canuck was considered a war hero of sorts. He had been made long after the War of Kinds, but there had been numerous rebellions, large and small, in the 5 decades since the war itself. One of the biggest, a series of coups called the Southern Uprisings, had been quelled almost single-handedly by Canuck and his ingenuity. On top of that, he was the founder and head of the anti-reliance movement, a very new political group that sought to distance automakind and humankind even further, literally. Most of their agenda centered on building a new Automa capital to the far north, in a territory that was uninhabitable to humans, instead of continuing to use the current capital, Yana, which had once been a human city. This is on the 3rd page of the first chapter, and it would be considered what we call info dumping. Info dumping refers to when the book just dumps information onto the reader, and it often reads like a shopping list or a textbook, and it's not immersive. Now, a lot of sci-fi writers in particular struggle with info dumping because there's a lot of information you need to fit in a short amount of time in order to get readers up to speed the world that you've entered into. However, doing this without context or without points of interest is going to make your writing weaker and something that readers are not going to want to engage with. Furthermore, and most importantly, it's a sign the story isn't finished. A good editor will catch info dumping and have you revise these parts and introduce the information in a new and more interesting fashion. Crier's War needed more revising. There were other parts of it that needed a lot more attention, such as the characters needing to push the plot forward more, the pacing at the beginning and ending, and just general dialogue things that needed to be revised. It's not finished. A way to apply this to your own writing is asking yourself, are the character arcs done? Are the plot threads tied up? Is the setting fully realized? Has the pacing been reviewed? And most importantly, have I gotten enough feedback on my book yet? Have someone else gone through it, and have we been thorough and complete with our working of the story? These are all questions you can ask yourself in order to bring your writing to the next level. All right, let's move on to the third and final question you can ask yourself, which is it yours? Is it something only you can write? Is this the story you want to write? Is this the story you need to tell? Writers can sometimes write stories they think they should be writing instead of stories they want to write. For instance, they can chase the market and write fairy stories or apocalyptic YA instead of stories about robots trying to find their lost dogs, or anything that brings out your inner voice. An example of a book with an incredible individual voice is The Particular Sadness of Lemon Cake by Aimee Bender. This is a magical realism story about a young girl who can taste the emotions of people who made the food for her. And this leads to her realizing harsh truths about her family and her life and place in the world. The story itself is incredibly original. It's marching to the beat of its own drum without alienating the reader. Let me read you a section. As I finished that first bite, as that first impression faded, I felt a subtle shift inside, an unexpected reaction. As if a sensor, so far buried deep inside me, raised its scope to scan around, alerting my mouth to something new. Because the goodness of the ingredients, the fine chocolate, the freshest lemons, seemed like a cover over something larger and darker, and the taste of what was underneath was beginning to push up from the bite. I could absolutely taste the chocolate, but in drifts and traces, in an unfurling or an opening. It seemed that my mouth was also filling with a taste of smallness, the sensation of shrinking, of upset, tasting a distance I somehow knew was connected to my mother, tasting a crowded sense of her thinking, a spiral, like I could almost even taste the grit in her jaw that had created the headache that meant she would take as many aspirins as were necessary, a white dotted line of them in a row on the nightstand, like an ellipsis to her comment, "I'm just going to lie down." She's not copying someone else without putting herself back in. It's just her writer voice all the way through. In order to add this to your own writing, ask yourself, is this me? Does this reflect my beliefs and inner world? Does this say something important in the way I need to say it? Incorporate yourself as much as you can into your writing, and you will find that readers respond to that. They connect to it, and they want to know more. So those are the 3 questions you can ask yourself about your writing. Is it honest? Is it finished? is it yours? Again, I am Jacqueline Lyon. I work for Dot and Dash LLC. If you'd like to get in contact with us, just hit us up below. If you have ideas for other videos you'd like to see me do in the future on writing, please leave it in the comments section and we'll see what we can do. All right, thank you very much. Goodbye.
Hmm.